Hello? Testing. Testing. Okay, so this is a PowerPoint on Write It, Do It, the event. So Write It, Do It is a hands-on partner event, and how it works is basically there's two partners. One of them is the writer and one of them is the doer. You get one device, so basically in the event, the event supervisors give you a device that they make before, and the first person, which is the writer, has 25 minutes to write instructions on how to create that create that device. And then the doer after that, the doer has to take the instructions that the writer made, and in 20 minutes they have to try to rebuild the device, a replica device. But of course they haven't seen the original device, so you have to use just the instructions that the writers made. And the device that the event supervisor will give you can be made out of anything from household materials to lab equipment. Here are just some examples of the types of materials that they could be making the device out of. So it could be Legos, blocks, these gear things as well. So when you're practicing, you should be using a variety of different materials so that you can get practice with using all of them. So yeah, this is just a review. The writer has 25 minutes and the doer has 20 minutes to make the device. The writer should be using the full amount of time when they are writing, because the amount of time you take doesn't matter, but for the doer it actually does matter how much time you take, because if there's a tie, in the case of a tie, the doer they will take, in case of a tie, they will take the doer who used the least amount of time. So for example, if there's two teams that had like around the same score, they would take the team that took the least amount of time to build the device. So the writer shouldn't be worried about timing, but the person who's building the device should probably worry about timing a little bit, but you don't have to stress too much about it. So when the doer gets hit the materials, they're going to be all disassembled, and there could be extra materials as well. So you need to make sure that you actually can understand the instructions, because you might not always use all of the materials that they give you. There could be extra materials, they could be replacement ones, so you need to be careful about that. So when writing the instructions, some things not to do that are against the rules: you can't have any drawings, or you can't have any diagrams, and you can't make any non-standard symbols. So you can't before the event, you can't have any code symbols or anything like that. That's not allowed. But what you can use is you can have abbreviations for common words that appear a lot, or you can also have any symbol. You can use any symbols that appear on a standard keyboard. So any letters, any numbers, and all of the symbols, like the hashtag sign, the dollar sign, anything like that. So how they score the device is they base it on how many corrections that you get connections with the device. So for example, the scoring is very subjective, so it really depends on the event supervisor that you get. They could just be looking, they could break the device up into smaller parts and look at them or they could also look at it as a whole. For example, they could look at it as layers. They could go from the bottom up. They could start from the bottom layer, and they could see if you got the positions right, and then they could keep moving up. So it really depends on the event supervisor, but in general, they give 1 point for the presence of an item. So if that item that was in the original device is actually there. The second point is for the location. So if it's in the correct location relative to the entire device. And the third point would be for orientation, if it's facing the right way. And again, like I said, ties would be broken by the time taken by the doer to make the entire device. So some strategies when preparing for your for this event. Since for screening, how the screening is going to work is basically you are not going to be tested on the building part of it because you're not going to have a partner. So for screening, you're only going to be doing it by yourself. I'll be giving you a device that I've made, and then you'll have about 25 minutes to write a set of instructions on how to build the device, and I'll be grading you on how well your instructions are, how if they're like understandable, if they have like if you used all of these strategies that I've talked about. One thing that to keep in mind when you're making the instructions is it's not, yes, you need to be very detailed in your instructions, but there's also ways to save time and also be detailed at the same time. So for example, you could use abbreviations. TLC, TRC, BLC, BRC, those would be abbreviations for like top left corner, top right corner, bottom left corner, and bottom right corner. Other things that you could do for abbreviations, one example would be, for example, if you had to say so if you wanted to say something like place the yellow cube horizontally flat on the table, instead of writing all of those words out, which would probably be a lot, you could just say yellow cube horizontal on the table. So there's a lot of ways to still have clear and detailed instructions, but they also should be very concise because you don't have that much time. You should be making abbreviations after you get your partners. You need to work a lot with your partners, make sure you have like common things that you've come up with. So for example, one thing that you need to come up with your partner is what kind of direction system, like how are you going to communicate with them the orientation of something. So one thing you could do is north, south, east, west, and you probably have to go more detailed into that. Like you could say north, east, northwest, things like that. You could also use degrees, so you could go from 0, 90 degrees, 360 degrees. And another thing you could do is clock face, which is basically like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So there's many ways that you can communicate the direction or the orientation of something with your partner, but that's something that you'll get to after you get your partner, and then you guys can talk about that. Another thing is to make sure you have a clear system of measurement. So for example, you will need to know like how to tell them like, okay, place this one object these many units away from another object. So you would also need to think of what kind of measurements you would want to use. If you want to use inches, centimeters, and even if you don't want to use something as precise as that, you could even use like a finger length or like a fingertip length. So that all are things you need to plan beforehand with your partner. And it's really important to be using shortcuts because that could really save you like 5 to 10 minutes just by writing some common phrases but in a shorter way. So another thing is that using improper grammar is actually okay, but just make sure that your partner actually understands what you're writing. So this will come with a lot of practice, but sometimes, like the example that's given here, instead of saying place a long gray next piece vertically on the table in the 12 to 6 position, instead of that, you could just say gray stick at 12 to 6. So as long as your partner understands what you're saying, then it should be okay. But make sure that you're not too vague about it. And like I said before, the writer should spend the entire time writing because that doesn't matter for them. The amount of time that it takes for them doesn't matter. And another thing that might be helpful to do when you're trying to write instructions is basically break the device up into smaller portions. So like you won't be able to exactly be touching the device a lot of times. So practice not touching the device because most probably you're not going to be able to touch the device. So make sure you could walk around it and see all of the angles of it. But anyways, when you're making your instructions, one good thing is to basically like in your mind break up the device into smaller sections and then write the instructions for each little section one at a time, so that by breaking it up into smaller sections, then it'll be more easier to write detailed instructions, and just basically easier for the doer also to kind of organize and build the device. And make sure that when you are writing, color, orientation, position, those are all things that need to be specified in your instructions. So you need to say, because they could give extra material. So for example, if there's only one cube on the entire device, just saying cube probably won't help, because they could give the doer like extra cubes of different colors. So just say like, place the yellow cube here. So you always need to make sure that you have the color down, and orientation also. And like we said, you can use any of these: north, south, east, west, degrees, and clock face. Okay, so how to practice for these. It's harder to practice for the screening because you don't have your partner, so it's much harder. So, but you can still do it. You just need a lot of practice. Basically, the first thing you would want to do is just collect a lot of items. It doesn't matter, like, just as it could be the randomest items, like, but they use a lot of like toys, like I showed in this one. They like Legos is a really good one. These logs, like just gears and anything like that. And even if you have like just any household material would be good. Just collect a lot of those up, and then you can tell someone to make a structure for you. It doesn't need to be like, it just needs to be like, it needs to be very small. It could probably take up like 10 to 15 items depending on how complicated you want to make the structure. But you can tell someone to make the structure for you, and then time yourself for 25 minutes. Try to figure out try to make a list of instructions, and then review it. So make sure, like, go over it, see how detailed is it actually, and you should send them to me as well if you ever want to get feedback on how you can improve your instructions. Just send them to me. You can send them to me, and you can also send me a picture of the device, and then I can give you feedback on in what ways you can make your instructions more like cohesive, more better to understand. Once you get your partner, and like after screening is over, and once you actually get your partner, you need to practice communicating with your partner, because that is the key to this event. To do good in this event, you and your partner need to be good at understanding each other, understanding each other's writing. You need to have established all of these strategies, like the definitions, abbreviations, all that kind of stuff beforehand. So you really need to practice understanding your partner. And one thing that might help once you get your partner is kind of just do an oral practice round. So you could have like a structure, and then the writer would just, instead of like writing them down on a piece of paper, like in the beginning, you can just say them out loud, and that would go a little bit faster, and it just kind of help get your thoughts out, and just it would be a good beginning practice strategy. Practice on harder models, of course. You always want to, the harder the better. And also, like I said, practice not touching the model, because most likely you're not going to be able to touch the model during the event. So these are just some pictures of sample projects, or sorry, sample devices that were given before. So as you can see over here, this is a Lego one, and basically one way that you could kind of set up the instructions to this is basically you could use this gray bottom grid, and you could kind of, since it's like, you could kind of count, you can make it kind of like a grid, and then you can say, okay, place the 6 dot, or you could place the 4 dotted yellow cube on you kind of use it as a coordinate system. So if you have Legos, that might be a good idea. It might be a little harder if the board is bigger. but you can always yeah, you can always use that. And then you also, especially with Legos, you want to make sure you're like talking about the color, you're talking about the direction it's facing, and you're talking about like how big it is. So like you could use it by the number of dots that it has. And this one over here is another one. So this one has like styrofoam and pipe cleaners, I think. So for this, you might need to be talking about like, you might need to specify to your partner in the instructions like how wide the arc is. So you could, if you want, you could use like degrees, or you can just say like, oh, make sure the arc is extended from the right side of the styrofoam to the left side. So that all comes with practice. And here's another sample problem. So this one, it uses the gears and tires. So over here you could kind of break it up into the different, you could break it up into like since the top half of the device and the bottom half. So first you could say like how to make the tires and the purple gears attached to each other, and then you can talk about this top half where they're one tire. And another thing to make sure about is get familiar with like different like folding or gluing, because they might make you do that, like fold, bend objects, glue objects together, like connect them. So especially if you have these are called, I think they're called Nex toys. So you should be familiar with how to like connect these and connect those to the tires and stuff like that. And then of course like Legos and stuff as well. And this is one more, another one. Okay, so here are some resources that might be of help to you. One of them is a PowerPoint. Okay, so this is a from a coach's handbook. Basically, they just gave you tips on how to like different strategies that you can use. For example, for a Lego one, you can like talk. So for Lego, if you have a Lego structure, one thing that might be helpful is to work by layers, because a lot of the time Legos are they're like layered up. So you could say in the first layer you have to put these many blocks and in these positions, and then you go on to the second layer and third layer and fourth layer. So that would be helpful. And it also talks about just useful phrases and words. Make sure you are familiar with all these words and just know when to use them, in like what context to use them and things like that. And then another resource over here is more tips on how to strategize. So a lot of the resources that you'll find with this event, it'll just basically give you a lot of strategies, but what you need to do on your part is just basically practice. That's the best way to improve in this event. And you can also, like I said, send me your instructions so that you can get more feedback and I can tell you how to make it better. Yeah, so that's it. If you have any questions, you can comment on the comment section.